Live from StartupFest in Montreal, this is Big Shot.
We're here for our first Big Shot Live here in Montreal, the city of entrepreneurs.
Different venue, different setting. As you can see, we're in a green room right now. We are live. We're in a green room right now at the back of StartupFest in Montreal. Our first ever live taping in front of a studio audience at Big Shot for Big Shot.
And where better to be than Montreal, this city with it has this rich immigrant entrepreneurial culture.
Yeah, and now all of you have probably heard about Indigo, the bookstore. 200 stores, right?
Yeah, billion in sales.
What you probably have not heard is how Heather Reisman built this company brick by brick with strategy and acquisitions and capital and figuring out all these different techniques to grow. But at the core of it all, it's her deep understanding of the consumer. She built a business, $1 billion business, based on her own interests, right?
And then she uses that cheat code for the two things that really lead to success.
That's right, yeah.
And how she came throughout her career, a series of missteps.
That's right.
To realize this was the essence of what was going to make her successful.
Same time, even though she's this incredible, entrepreneur, and she's so aggressive about how she builds, she always has time for family. She talks about her 11 grandchildren. She talks about her love and her relationship with her husband, and how they collaborate and strategize together. This episode is amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, Heather Reisman.
Started from the bottom, now the whole team here. Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now my whole team in. Started from the bottom, now we here.
All right.
Started from the bottom, now
Funny
the whole
story.
team.
We're the only podcast on the planet.
Living at my mama's house, we'd argue every month.
You can break it down. We're the only podcast on the planet that actually licensed that song from Drake. So Started from the Bottom is actually licensed to us.
Yeah.
And that in itself is a great story. Before we start, show of hands in the room if when you were growing up, you had a poster on your wall of an athlete or an actor or a celebrity. Okay, quite a few of you. David and I did not. When we were growing up, on our walls, we had photos and clippings and articles of entrepreneurs. David and I pray at the altar of entrepreneurship and have our entire lives. And a few years ago, we, for one reason or another, because of Shopify and David's Tea and all this stuff, we began to meet some of the most iconic entrepreneurs on the planet. We decided we would start recording these sit-down, these coffee chats, learning about where they come from and how they've built these incredible businesses and empires. Now, two things sort of came up for us. The first one was, those are our people, those are our stories. David and I are proud Jewish entrepreneurs, and so the idea of interviewing other Jewish entrepreneurs was kind of mind-blowing. But the second thing was that all of these people that we interviewed started from absolutely nothing. In fact, some of them started from living in displaced persons camps. People like Eddie Sunshine, who goes on to create the modern-day REIT and build RioCan, or Izzy Sharp, who created the Four Seasons Hotel, or Fran Weisler, who basically created modern Broadway and created Chicago. And so we put out this podcast about 2 years ago called Big Shot, and to our incredible surprise and delight, it's become one of the biggest business podcasts on the planet. And so it's, I think Bashert is the term to use, that we'd be coming here to Montreal, where my family started their journey, and so did David.
Yeah, we got to pause there. We never thought, we're filming our first live Big Shot here in Montreal. Montreal is a dynamic city built by immigrants. Harley's grandfather sold eggs at the Jean Talon market. My family came here at the turn of the century and started a clothing business on Chabanel called Peerless Clothing that became a big business. And, entrepreneurship is deep within the roots of the Jewish culture. And these stories, there are a lot of great immigrant cultures that have great entrepreneurs, but these are our stories. They have timeless wisdom, endless learnings, and we're here today to share them with you.
With one of the best entrepreneurs ever.
Best entrepreneurs in Canada, one of the best ever. All of you know her, you've read her books, you've followed her picks. She has a company with over 200 stores, $1 billion in sales. She's an incredible entrepreneur who's had an impactful career. Her philanthropy is iconic. She's helped build hospitals and help with schools. And we're going to hear all about her today and everything she has to tell us, the inside stories and all the trials and tribulations along the way.
And all of you are here for the first ever live viewing, live audience of Big Shot. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And ladies and gentlemen, Heather Reisman.
now the whole team here. Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now my whole team here.
Welcome to Big Shot, Heather.
I'm so glad to be here in my own hometown. As a matter of fact, you were telling stories about your parents. My grandfather sharpened skates for the Montreal Canadiens.
Oh, that's cool.
There's my connection.
That's great. So we usually like to start right at the beginning with Big Shot. We take it right back to what it was like growing up in the Reisman household.
So I grew up in a household of 4 kids, my parents. We had a wonderfully close-knit family. Dinner at our house was always a raucous affair. We discussed all kinds of things, the events of the day in our own lives, the events of the day in the world. We followed the evolution of Israel very closely. But I was blessed. I had a kind of leave it to beaver growing up.
What does that mean?
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh, I'm so old.
You're not that old. We want to go into it. Yeah.
We're mindful of the audience.
Oh, yeah, I know, of course. Anybody old enough to remember Leave It to Beaver?
My mom's right there, by the way.
Right. Leave It to Beaver was like, this program, I guess, in the 60s, and this sort of joyful family. Like, you'd never find it today. Everybody's dysfunctional, and dysfunctionality is kind of a badge of honor. Anyway, I had that kind of growing up. But I think to the discussion today, what was most significant is, although my dad was a good, successful businessman, my mom chose to work. So even though I'm one of 4, my mom chose to work, and remember, I am old, so that's a long time ago, sort of old. So she chose to work at a time when if your husband earned a good living, women didn't work, and my mom wanted to work, and my dad was hugely supportive of her decision to work for her own creative expression. And every now and then, one of his friends would say, but doesn't it worry you that sometimes she won't be home for dinner, or she travels to Europe for work, and who's going to make you dinner? And his answer, which I heard repeated many times in different ways, was, I can get somebody to help me make dinner, but I can't be married to someone as interesting as your mother for all the tea in China.
Wow.
So I grew up thinking that I could be a good wife, a good mom, and follow any additional dreams I had without thinking that was odd. Yeah. And then the other thing I remember from when I was growing up that I think is relevant to this story, when I was about 15, my brother was 18, he was just beginning McGill. And one of the things my dad did as they were doing all their sort of shopping just before getting ready for school, he bought him a pipe, because my dad always had a pipe. He sort of thought better
tobacco
with a
pipe.
pipe.
Just to be clear.
Tobacco,
yeah.
yes.
Different now.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. It wasn't vaping, it was smoking.
Right. Yeah.
So he bought him a pipe. And I was always intrigued with all of the activity around a pipe. Like if you have a pipe and you're putting in tobacco and you're tamping it down. I always found it interesting. And I said to my dad, I want a pipe. And he said...
You were 15 years old?
I was 15.
Okay.
He said, sweetie, I understand that, but you're a bit young. The next night he came home and he had this beautiful white meerschaum pipe, a lady's pipe.
Wow.
And he said, you're too young to smoke now, but put it away, and when you're 18, if you want to try it, go for it.
Wow.
So...
He seems like he always encouraged you to sort of pursue the thing that you were interested in.
Exactly. Both my parents, I think among the most valuable things that they transferred to me was a deep belief in family, but also a belief that you could follow your dreams and that your dreams would not be constrained by whether you were male or female, or anything in between.
Do you think we still encourage our kids in the same way today? I mean, so much has changed. Is it still by modeling and by encouraging in those ways? I mean, my kid came to me and asked for a pipe right now. If he was 14 years old, I'd say you're crazy.
I'll buy him a pipe.
Listen, I think how you choose to do it, I can't comment on that. What I do believe is kids are a reflection of what they see, just as we are all a reflection of what we see and experience, and kids in particular. The things you model when your children are young create the deepest brain impressions. I mean, your wife's a neuroscientist. I'm sure she'll tell you that.
She does.
That the deepest impressions in your brain happen when you're young or in some deeply affecting experience.
Let's go back to sort of when you were young and you were sitting, at your mom's store. It was a jewelry store, I believe, right?
No, it was a clothing store.
Clothing store. And you worked at that store?
I did.
What'd you do there?
I folded things.
Okay.
I sold things. I tidied up the office. I did whatever she asked me.
And did you like that environment? Did you like being around?
I did.
Okay.
I did.
And watching your mom be an
did.
entrepreneur?
Yeah, I did. I did like it. Actually, my dad bought the store.
Okay.
He was in real estate, and it's a long story of how he ended up buying it, but he didn't know what to do with it when he had it. My mom had never worked in retail, but he for sure didn't know what to do, so she decided to help him, and it just became a passion for her.
Wow. When did you fall in love with books?
I think I was around 2. Like
Two?
Two. And it's another thing I can tell you. Books are my passion, and I've always said that Indigo is a combination of passion and destiny. 2 is when I can remember being read to. I can remember from the time I was 2. But I was only about 8 when I used my allowance to join the Book of the Month Club, because you got 3 books for free. 8 or 10. I guess I was 10, because they had these teen books, and I was already reading, teen.
It's kind of a weird thing for an 8-year-old to spend their money,
10.
or a 10-year-old to spend their money on.
Yeah. So I've been in love with books as long as I can remember, and I have most of my books. I've saved my books, and I have my school books, the books I read when I was a teenager.
Was this modeled for you as well? Were your parents huge readers? Or
my parents were huge readers. My parents were readers, and in particular, my dad had this special area for the books he was reading or had read, and we used to go, as soon as I was like a young teenager, we used to go to his shelf of things and pick books. And I was reading, I read The Fountainhead when I was 13 or 14.
Flex, wow.
I didn't quite get all of the underlying capitalist story.
Yeah.
I read Herman Wouk, all those books. I read them when I was young.
They say that
I love
curiosity
books.
makes the best entrepreneurs. What do you think about that?
I think curiosity is actually the key of everything. Like, we hire for curiosity. I'm sure you hire for curiosity. And, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I was together with a man named Daniel Zafman, who until recently was the president of the Weizmann Institute in Israel, which is one of the great science postgraduate universities. And I was asking him how they recruit their scientists, PhD students, and their professors. And he said, only on 2 things. Can they demonstrate deep curiosity, and do they have intense ability to stick with what they're interested in?
Wow.
He said, that's it.
Determination. Yeah.
Determination and curiosity.
I love that.
Which is
it's kind of
the heart
makes
of
sense.
It's kind of perfect. The interest and the appetite to explore, but also the ability to stay with it for a longer period of time and not bounce around.
Right. So I got married, and That was my first biggest dream, actually, was not to be in business. It was to have children.
That's what you wanted. That was your goal.
I wanted children. Again, I fell in love with reading, and I fell in love with children when I was a child. So I got married. I had 2
There
kids.
she is smoking her pipe.
You guys should have kids.
My pipe, my book, and my kids. Right? But I think I really wanted to have children. I'm not so sure about the husband I picked. Mm-hmm. I thought he was okay at the time, but I really
not
wanted
her current
to have
husband.
children.
It's her first husband. I just want to be clear here.
Husband, right.
Those of you that know Jerry,
We all need a start or something, right?
Starter husband.
But I did end up with 2 amazing kids, but that didn't go so well, and I decided I was going to leave. My husband at the time decided, if I was going to leave, I could leave with the kids, but he wasn't going to be doing much on the financial side, so I had to go to work. And I went to work. My brother at the time had a computer company, and he hired me.
What was the job? Do you remember what the job was?
It was called Time.
What was the job that they hired you for?
Well, they hired me to learn how to program in BASIC.
Wow.
You know what BASIC
Yeah, of course.
is?
Yeah, sure.
Does anybody have
We're not that young.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So I learned how to code in BASIC. Actually, this is a good story. I think it's
Tell
a
us.
good story.
Yeah.
I learned how to code in BASIC, and I was so into it that I was dreaming strings at night. Like literally, I was dreaming about it. So I had someone to help me. I had a housekeeper, and I was working. I had to work, and I was so into it. And one day I came in, and all my notepads were moved to the reception. And my brother had a partner, and the receptionist had quit, and my brother's partner decided I was losing my job as a coding trainer, and I was becoming a receptionist.
Bold move.
Really?
Yep.
How'd that make you feel?
I was out the door in half an hour.
Good for you.
That is a true story.
Good for
What was
you.
that phone call with your brother like?
I needed, that's another story. I needed a job, but I didn't want to work as a receptionist.
Yeah, and you had
really
high integrity to what you wanted to do.
And I'd been coding. By then, I'd been coding for about a year and a half, and I was into it. And the company was a mini computer company. It was one of the first mini computer companies, just when mini computers were becoming of interest to small to medium-sized businesses who wanted their financial systems on a computer, their inventory management systems. And I was so interested in it. I was like really interested in it. And I was single. And I went out on a date with someone who owned a consulting firm. Again, I don't know how many dates there were, but I got a job.
Right. I mean, it worked,
I got
obviously,
a job.
yeah.
And I worked for this consulting firm.
What did they consult on?
So they were doing kind of operating strategy for medium-sized businesses.
Is this Paradigm or Paradigm?
No, before Paradigm. They were doing operating strategy for medium-sized businesses. But they had recruited to their organization a young man who had just finished a PhD at MIT on organization change into the consulting firm. And they had two big clients, Steinberg's. Remember Steinberg's?
Homegrown story, yeah.
Homegrown story, right? And he was on the Steinberg's account doing organization development. And he and I struck up a friendship. And over the next 2.5 years, we worked at that firm. He literally, to the best that was possible, he transferred all of his organization development, organization change learning to me, including, he had 2 thesis advisors. He was MIT's youngest, Sloan School's youngest PhD graduate, a fellow named Mark Gerstein. And he introduced me to his 2 thesis advisors. And I couldn't go back to school. Like I had kids, I was supporting them. They created study guides for me. Like it was like my own version of Oxford.
Incredible.
Right.
And I was so into it. And it was the very beginning of organization change, which essentially deals with the application of technology to strategy. So you wonder, how the hell did I get into this digital
I was going to
mess?
say, and now you're doing it all the time.
That's a whole story. Okay. So anyway, long and short was, we left after 3 years working at this consulting firm. We left and we set up Paradigm, which was a firm that dealt with strategy and organization change. We were the first organization change firm in the world.
Wow. And this was really your first business that you owned yourself.
My first business. We were partners. And we grew it to have about, at our largest, we were about 18 consultants, which was a good-sized consulting firm. And then I got recruited to a client.
But before we go there, I mean, I'm sensing a pattern here. You went through, and we're going to talk about this later on with your experiences in the book business at Indigo, right. But you went from, I mean, you are not afraid of change. I mean, you went from folding clothes to being a mother, to learning how to code in BASIC, now to becoming an operation change expert, strategy expert. Yeah. How does change feel to you when you know, many people get anxious when they experience change. You embrace it. So what does that feel like to you? I mean, when you have to move, you've had these major changes throughout your life so far.
Of course, I get anxious when I have to embrace everybody. No, it's a good, it's a good question, and I'm just kibitzing with you. Well, so we had this consulting firm for 16 years. It was a really beautiful firm, and it pioneered a lot of things that are still in use today. And a lot of the clients that we worked with, Canadian clients and a couple of American clients, they still talk about, like the leaders that were there then still talk about the work. So I was very proud of the work that we did. And then I got to this point where I didn't want to consult, I wanted to do. Wow. And so I was 46. By this time, I had remarried, and my kids were on their way to university. And I didn't want to consult.
What was it about consulting that made you?
It was a business, but we were working hard with our clients on strategies for them to implement.
And you want to implement.
And I wanted to implement.
Sure.
And that's what happened.
And you ended up going to Cott next, I think.
Yes. And
I Cott was a
wanted
client
to
of Paradigm?
Cott was our client.
Yeah.
When they came to us, they were a soft drink company.
You guys remember Cott, C-O-T-T? Amazing company.
It actually started as a Canadian company. And they were a client. They were just beginning to work with President's Choice, with Dave Nichol. And they came to our consulting firm to do some work. And I was the lead person on the assignment. And after 9 months of work, the founder, CEO, offered me a job as president to come and implement. And I really, really, really wanted to implement.
But you're still an owner in this consulting.
Right. So I sold my part to my partner, who then sold it to a larger consulting firm. And I took this job as the president. And over 3 years, over a 3-year period, and the core concept of what drove the growth was the founder, CEO. But over 3 years, we grew the company was roughly 110 million when I went to about 900 million.
Wow.
It was a rocket ship.
3 years.
Amazing.
It was a rocket ship story. It was a rocket ship story. But I woke up.
Miss Reisman, you give it 200.
You're in the wrong place, man. We're here.
Stop attacking me. Stop attacking me. Miss Reisman, you're supporting a genocide. Stop attacking me. Why are you messing with the ground like this?
This is about entrepreneurship. The rallies down the street.
Do you want to know the truth?
No.
Do you want to know the truth?
I want to know the truth, yes.
The truth is, do you want to know the truth?
I want to know the truth.
The truth is that we fund
Stop assaulting me. Stop assaulting me. She's want to give me the truth.
I would give them the truth.
Wrong
Does
venue.
anybody want to know the truth?
Sorry.
The truth is we fund education for people with no parents. That's what we do. That's what we do. We fund education for people with no parents at all. But that lie has been perpetrated. So I'm so glad he gave me a chance. I would have given him. I would have chatted with him if he wanted to engage.
That's the most anti-fragile sort of thing that you took an opportunity like that.
Yeah, I think you answered my question about change real well.
Yeah, exactly.
You may have gotten nervous, but wow.
In your world, this is a pivot. We just pivoted.
Well, David said, why don't we do more live tapings? But yeah.
All right,
I apologize.
back to our feature presentation.
Do I have my back to all of you? Are you feeling okay? Do you want me to move my chair slightly? We're okay? Okay, anyway, where were we? Okay, so I went to Cott, and...
so you go from 100 million to 900 million in 3 years in
but
top
110
line.
million to 900 million, and real margins, like that business had margins. But two things were problematic for me. One, the CEO and I shared the excitement about growing a business, but our value system was not exactly aligned. So while he hired me, and I'm a woman, and hugely empowered me, it would not be unusual for him to try and tell a dirty joke in a meeting, and I would go like entirely ballistic.
Inappropriate.
Politely, but inappropriately. So we had different style, right? We had different style. He's quite brilliant, but different style. But more importantly, when I did the work at Paradigm, I so believed in our work. Like there was huge conceptual integrity to the work. It was rooted in real theory and practical application, but there was huge rigor to the work, and I believed in it. At the end of the day, I didn't care how many soft drinks got sold, and by crazy coincidence, almost 30 years later, I ended up making a documentary about the evils of soft drinks.
Wow. Full circle.
But well, if we ever get to that, probably not in an hour, we can't get to that. So, but I didn't care about the product. It was soft drinks and then there were snacks. It just had no meaning for me.
Because you went in as an operational.
Yeah, I was president,
right.
and I was on the strategy and then to operate, right, to operate. And then to your question of being able to manage change, I did the single least effective thing on how to manage change. I built up this sort of sense of frustration and lack of satisfaction, and I walked in one day and I said to the CEO, I'm really grateful for the opportunity and I'm glad we have this friendship, but I'm leaving in a month.
Ooh. How do you wish you'd handled it?
In a month. Well, I had no idea what I was going to do. And all the time up until then, I was balancing kids and work, and all of a sudden, this very moment, both my kids were in university, away. I leave my job. I wake up. The first few days, I felt amazing.
You're free.
I'm free of a place I didn't want to be. And then I literally went into the only kind of depression of my life. I was like, I had nothing to do. Like for the women in this room, I can say I was the kind of person that if I needed to go on a trip and I had to do some shopping, I could get into a shoe store at 5 to 6 and leave with 3 pair of shoes 2 minutes later. During this period, I remember going to a shoe store in Toronto called David's.
Sure.
Right? You know where that is?
David Shoes.
David Shoes.
Not to be confused with the T.
And I could not make a decision between 2 pair of black shoes. That's how discombobulated I was.
You're like paralyzed almost at that point.
I was paralyzed.
I mean, just to say the thing also, if my math is right here, you had basically been working for like 25 years straight at that point.
Right.
Yes.
And this is the first time.
We're still not at the bookstore.
Exactly. I mean, Paradigm started in 1979.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about 1994 or so.
Exactly.
And this is the first time you're finding yourself
Nothing.
nothing to do.
And no sense of who I was. Like, I sort of thought it was like a big deal, running this company. I was doing all of the running of it. And it was horrible. But it turned out to be the most productive 5 months of my life. Because what did I do? I took myself to my own happy place, which was a bookstore. And my eye happened to catch a book that I still recommend today called Clicking by a woman named Faith Popcorn, who is a kind of pop psychologist. And the essence of this book is about when you're clicked into gear with work. When you're at work, if you're feeling uncomfortable with work, it's like not being in gear if you're driving a gear shift car and your energy falls out the bottom. But if you're doing what you really are curious about, interested in, it's like you are in full gear and you are just, the bad days are a little bad, but everything else, your energy is just flowing. And in the book, she inspires people who are in a transition or not a good period to put on paper the 4 or 5 conditions that must be in place for you to feel that you will be able to fully access your creative energy.
Wow.
And I did. And I said, 1, I have to believe passionately in the product or service. I have to believe in it. 2, it has to be something that can grow to scale. I'm just not a good mom and pop kind of person. Yeah. I have to feel that I'm as close to the customer as possible, because I understood from my work that the closer you are to the customer, the more you're inspired. Their values are going to drive the business. And I had to feel that much of what I understood about how to grow an organization and process design work which is the technical specialty I developed, could be applied. Like, I know supply chain. So I just put down, it's got to leverage some things that I know, and that was my list.
And what'd you do with that?
And so I kept looking at it, nothing jumped out. And then I got a call from a friend of mine with whom I sat on the board of another company, who was on the board of Borders Books, and they wanted to come to Canada.
They were just in the US at this point?
They were in the US,
okay.
And they wanted to come to Canada. And the Canadian regulation was such that they needed a Canadian partner. And he said, look, we're just looking for someone to put some money in, and it's an amazing deal. Put your money in, we guarantee you an 18% return.
Not bad.
And if we ever, I didn't have to be that smart to say yes. And if ever we have the permission, we will buy you out at 3 times your money.
And that sort of business, that sort of book retail business, that hit all 5 of those points.
Well, I was passionate about books, so I went down, I learned things about the business, I visited it many times. They only wanted me to be the chair, not really to muck around in the business, right?
Right.
They didn't want me.
Noses in, fingers out.
Yeah. Just put your money in, be there.
Your money in your passport. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But, I went down, I was still going to invest in it, I learned about it, I was like in heaven, everything about it I loved. And then for a very unusual set of circumstances, the application for them to come to Canada coincided with the oui, non vote here in Quebec. Was happening at the same time. And at that time, the cabinet in Ottawa decided that the way they were going to wave the Canadian flag was not to let Borders come to Canada.
That was their token.
That was their token,
symbol.
right? And so the deal fell apart.
Wow.
And I decided I'm doing it anyway. I knew nothing about retail. I knew nothing about books except I was a customer, but it ticked every single box. And Chapters, Larry Stevenson had already started Chapters in partners with Barnes & Noble. They had 17 stores. He was off and running. He had bought Kohl's. He was off and running.
So there was already sort of an incumbent here in
There was
Canada
an incumbent.
in that business.
Right.
And you were going to open one store in Burlington, Ontario?
Well, it wasn't my idea to only open one store, but I was going to start with one store. But I hired a consulting firm to help me figure out, was there an entry strategy? And like typical consultants, not my kind of consultant.
Right.
I had opinions.
There's other kinds of consultants,
right. They said, well, you could win and you could not. And that was good enough.
They're going to be right no matter what.
And
here's my bill.
And I had so many thoughts when I was visiting Borders about how I would do it differently. What did I want? That I looked at my list, I sat down with a piece of paper, and I imagined the perfect bookstore for me.
Wow.
And that was the first Indigo.
And was
the first
this tremendously exciting for you, or?
It was totally exciting, and we raised, on my little piece of paper, we raised $25 million.
Wow. Because, 17 stores, Indigo's well over 200, but when I remember this from David's TV, there was Ethiopia, they had 14, and it seemed like Mount Everest to climb, right?
Well,
you don't realize
I
the
had
size
in
of the
mind
market.
that I would build a Canadian chain. Like, I had that in mind, even though I had to start with one. And I had this concept for what we were going to do, and I went out to raise money. And I had been the one raising money for Cott, so I had relationships. And so I raised $25 million on a plan.
And I assume the $25 million raise for your business plan was...
To do 15 stores.
15 stores, that was the plan.
Yeah.
And you started with one, the first store is in Burlington?
In Burlington.
What was why was it different than Chapters? What made it different?
The way we approached the assortment, to me, felt differently. I'd shopped their stores, didn't love them. The things even then, I wanted to do a beautiful papery, because I always gave books as gifts, but I always wrote in a journal. And to me, a reader and a writer went together. I wanted to do my own cafe, not a Starbucks, because I wanted to serve wine. Because in my imagination, my romantic imagination, some of my customers were going to become the great Canadian novelists, and they were going to sit in the cafe with their wine. It was going to drip. Like, I had a romantic vision of what I wanted.
Right.
And so we had a papery, and we had our own Indigo Cafe, and we had these little, the kind of giftable items that I would give with a book. right? So it had a different sensibility.
And did that first store have that built in?
All of it.
It had all of it.
We had
So it
our
really
own
was the
Indigo
concept
Cafe.
store.
It was a concept store, and and it all was exciting until 5 in the morning before the first day of opening. All my team had gone home. I was there alone with the cleaners, and I looked around and I thought, like, what if I got the whole thing wrong? What if I got it all wrong? Like, it was different than what a Chapters looked like.
Yeah. And there was no other concept like that.
And there was none like ours. And I thought, what if I got it wrong? And I called my husband crying. So we were living in Rosedale then, and this was in Burlington, so almost a 15-minute drive. And he came out just as the sun was coming up, and it was so beautiful. Like, it was
Special
really
moment.
a beautiful store.
Yeah.
And we opened at 10 that day, and at 10:05 it was packed.
What a feeling.
Packed.
Amazing.
Yeah, so that's how it started.
And yet, I bet you did get a lot wrong too at the same time. And you got the essence of the concept right, clearly.
Yeah.
But when you step back at the end of that day, what went according to plan versus what didn't go the way you thought it would?
That store was a little bit of it was good. Like, I was the customer. I think businesses often do well when you're the customer or close, or at least in my case.
Totally.
I was the customer.
Yeah.
So there was just a lot of people like me.
Yeah. I mean, that's the
We're coming
assumption, right?
there, right?
That works really
Understood.
well when there are other people like you, and you believe that to be true.
I believe that to be
Yeah.
true
Which
about
is-
entrepreneurs.
right.
And we had lots of other issues. The store was great. We had lots of other issues. Our competition at the time, the company that we then bought, they were trying to keep us off the beaches, so they were taking up all the real estate. They were putting pressure on the publishers not to give it. I mean, don't get me wrong, we had thousands of issues, but it wasn't the store.
Right, the
store was
concept,
great.
the essence.
Yeah.
So how did you deal, I mean, the competition is trying to box you out. How do you deal with that?
There's all the stress of a startup, right? But in a way, we got lucky in that, and in this case, I had a competitor that to this day I have huge respect for, a man named Larry Stevenson, who started Chapters. He's a fantastic, super smart. But as a military man, he was very taken with the notion of don't let the other guys get on the beach. And he overexpanded, and he created some vulnerabilities. And he was a public company, and he had public shareholders. And it was just a lesson. Like, I say this, even though he created vulnerabilities, I have a lot of respect for him. But the long and short was he created some serious vulnerabilities, and his stock went from about 35 to 7.
Wow.
And he had a lot of pressure. And that can happen. There are moments when stocks bounce around.
I've heard that, yeah.
And I was living with someone who knew a lot about how to do acquisitions. And I came home one night and I said, listen, like, this company is not controlled. The stock's at 7. There's unbelievable synergy if we put these together. Like, we were battling like
You would
crazy.
be the biggest in the country also.
And then I would be the biggest.
Yeah.
We were only like 25%.
Right, but the combination would just be a powerhouse.
Right.
You had the right experience, but they had the scale.
They had scale.
Yeah.
And I think for Larry, it was a business, but it didn't have the same soul,
Yeah.
Right.
And so it was just lucky, and I had this phenomenal advisor.
Who happened to live with you.
Who happened to live with me. And I still say that it was a lot of good fortune.
Yeah.
We were able to acquire them. We did an unbelievable integration, and we had just a powerhouse run.
And you acquired them in 2001, so it was a kind of weird time to make a big acquisition.
Yeah, we acquired them in 2001. I took on a ton of debt. That scared me.
Did they want to be acquired?
No.
No.
I know.
So how do you deal with?
You're filming this, and the
You look great, I think.
Yeah.
Don't you look great?
Okay,
But you're in the midst of negotiating this deal
Yeah.
with the other party doesn't want
Yeah.
to sell,
Right.
And then the deal happens. How do you then square the circle, right? Because you got to go in and now run this company.
Well, so they didn't control the stock, right? It was public. And he did not have a control position. So we made a bid, and the bid, we had to go up a little bit, but then the bid was accepted, so we owned it. And so that's an interesting question. When we went in, when I went in to Chapters we had to do the integration. I will say there are many things, many mistakes I've made along the way, big ones. The way we did the integration was a success moment, and I think it was because there was a lot of pressure on Chapters because of this. They tried to grow so fast to keep us away. There was huge stress on the company, and they knew Indigo was doing something right, and most of the people who worked there were passionate about the business. And they got that we were there because we were in love with that business. And so the integration
How did you make them feel that?
Because most of the people who were working there were passionate book lovers.
Yeah.
And I'm a book lover in my soul.
Right. So
So it's very easy to break down barriers. And we weren't there. It wasn't the kind of acquisition where we were there to, what can we strip out?
Right.
No, we were there to build a great Canadian company.
And build it together. Although it's interesting because in a lot of M&As, you sort of have two parties. In some cases, they're equals, and you combine them in sort of the 1 + 1 equals 3 type of scenario. In this case, they were much bigger than Indigo,
Right.
and they became Indigo.
Right.
So you had to sort of bring your culture and the way you did things into a much larger behemoth.
Right.
Not just make them be okay with it, but actually force them to embrace it almost, or get them to embrace it. That's a really difficult way to do that.
And, I mean, you didn't convert all the Chapters to Indigo. I mean, the Chapters still exist today. So you then had to manage
two brands. Yeah. That was one of the most difficult things. It remains an issue. I was very struck by the people who went to Chapters loved their Chapters. The customers loved their Chapter stores. And the people who went to Indigo loved their Indigo. And I was always struck by the Coke story. Does anybody remember when Coke, they changed their formula?
The New Coke?
New Coke, and it was a disaster.
Yeah.
That story was in my mind at that time, and I was afraid to put the Indigo brand on, and people would say, oh, it's just plastering it, and they're taking away our Chapters. So I was very tentative. And to this day, there are still some Chapters.
Because they are Chapters, they're not Indigo.
Yeah, and they run from the inside like Indigo, and now we could change them, it would be okay, because there are other issues. But so there's some left. But the internal culture changed within 6 months. It was one culture. We were there for the right reasons.
Yeah. And they saw that. I mean, they saw that you were successful. You talked about when you were a Paradigm Consulting, but even before so, this idea of transformation and bringing technology in and helping companies to sort of innovate. And I feel very proud to say that you and I have become friends the last few years. And frankly, my relationship with you is effectively us talking about technology and us talking about, sometimes you tell me something that I don't really want to hear, but I need to hear, and sometimes I tell you the same, and that's our wonderful dynamic. But you did something that is remarkable that most people in the room have heard of but don't know the story, which is in 2009, you decided to do something that no other book retail entrepreneur would ever do. You're the founder of a company that does e-readers, which is sort of like me starting to buy old school shopping malls. It doesn't really make that much sense. You sort of are disrupting yourself.
He'll probably be successful. I would say he's going to be successful.
My mom and dad are in the front row, so they definitely.
Where are they?
Yeah,
they
there's
think
mom
so.
and dad.
Oh, hi.
Yeah. Okay,
He's amazing. your mom and dad are
actually,
here too.
they're right there.
All right. Yeah.
We brought the whole mishpacha here. The whole family's here. Yeah. My mother's actually one of the grandmother judges here at StartupFest.
It's her birthday, right?
And it's her birthday, yeah. Happy birthday, Mom. Love you. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Okay, all right. I digress.
Yeah.
You decide you now are running the largest book retailer in Canada, one of the biggest book retailers on the planet.
Right.
And in 2009, you decide to launch an e-reader company called Kobo. Remember if you've heard Kobo?
Right.
You still have it. Credible company. Why in God's name would you do that, Heather?
Okay. Well, two reasons. One, I was on the board of a company called J. Crew. Does anybody here know J. Crew?
We know Mickey Drexler.
Oh, you know Mickey? He was here.
He's one of our next guests on Big Shot.
Okay. So I was on Mickey's board, and I go to a meeting one morning, and it was the hippest company at the time. Like, it was the super hippest company. And half the people are just waxing lyrical about their Kindle. I still don't like to.
Yeah, it's okay. You don't have to say it.
And they're talking about it and talking about it, and I'm thinking like, what the heck? And anyway, I started to learn e-readers and what Amazon was doing with e-readers, and they were so into it, and I could see that the technology was going to upend, just like what had happened with MP3 had upended music stores. Right?
And was it the fact that you could store multiple books, or was the e-ink? What was it that you felt?
I personally didn't even like them.
You didn't like them?
But I could see that there were people who were attracted to this technology and that it had upended the music business. At that time, I was in an unbelievably lucky position. My chief technologist at the time, who, man, I miss him to this day, Harley. My chief technologist was a rocket scientist who had come back.
Actually, rocket scientist.
Yeah, Mike Strabinis. You know Mike,
yeah, I know
right?
Mike, yeah.
Mike, okay. Mike had come back to Canada from Silicon Valley, and he had joined Indigo because he also loved books. And he knew he wasn't going to be at Indigo forever, but we just had this great connection, and I wanted to do things technologically. And so we decided, okay, we could go up against Amazon in this technology, because it's just, in the end, it's just, you need the technologist.
Yeah.
And then my husband owned a company that made hardware. There's a lot of luck in my story. I think you're getting there's a lot of luck. And I think that's true. You need the hard work, you need the courage. But I am convinced, and I've been around a long time, that there is good fortune. You have to give credit to where good fortune. So I had a software technologist, and my husband owned a company that did hardware, and I had a great friend who was the number 2 at a company called IDEO. Do you know IDEO?
Yep. Design agent.
Design, like one of the greatest in the world.
Yep.
Right. So suddenly I could put this team together. I didn't know any of it, but I knew the customer. I was always the customer. So we did, and within 9 months we had Rev 1.
Wow.
And Rev 1 was not bad. Rev 2. Fast Company did a blind, not blind, but they had people test.
Doing reviews.
Kobo, Kindle, and Nook, and we won.
Wow. Nook was Barnes & Noble's version, right?
Nook was Barnes & Noble.
Yeah.
And we had a rocket ship. So at that time, Indigo was doing great. We had a rocket ship with Kobo. But I could see after 0 to 200 million in 2.5 years was a rocket ship. But I could also see Apple was getting in, Amazon was revving up. There was no way that long term, we're not a technology company.
Yeah.
We're really
and they're
not
capitalized to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars.
Unbelievable.
Right?
Only Shopify could go up against them.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, how did you,
well done.
Going back to the checklist, I mean, where you're the number 1 customer, right? You're the chief book lover, and you're not a customer of this. This is not for you.
I was not a customer of Kindle, but my customers were customers of Kindle.
And that was obvious.
And I was early into MP3 digital downloading. I respected that digitizing content was a real thing. But me personally, no, I love audio. Interestingly, I've become an audio fan and physical. So I read one, I listen to one. But anyway, so that was a rocket ship, but I was worried.
Yeah.
I was worried. I knew.
Yeah.
And there was that Rakuten, that company in Japan, had tried to buy Nook, and they ran into a disconcerting relationship with the owners, and they knocked on our door. And I mean...
That was it. So let me set the stage for the audience for a second. So companies get started in 2009, Kobo. In 2011, Rakuten comes and buys the company for over $300 million. That's her side project. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, that's right. That's the cliff note, the footnote, right? But Heather, when I met you, it was in the late 2000s, and Amazon had really ramped up.
Right.
Books as a category went from a major category to a much smaller category. And you were faced yet again with this huge transformation of the business. You had to, it had to be books adjacent. Talk to us a little bit. I mean, first you had to deal with e-readers, which you capitalized on, as Harley says, incredibly well. But after that was done and you're celebrating this acquisition, you now have this issue where you have a really big bookstore and the book category is shrinking.
So first of all, the book category wasn't shrinking. And when we sold Kobo, we did a 10-year deal that had us getting 50% of all ebook sale. Like we sold it. We actually sold it for $400 million.
Excuse me, sorry.
But no, wait,
I ran it down by $100 million.
No, you were right. We sold it for 400 US, but it included distribution in Borders in the US.
Oh, wow.
Borders went bankrupt between the time they made their offer and the close.
Wow.
And it shaved 70 million US off the price.
One thing that most people know but don't really understand is a very simple marketing concept called Heather's Picks. Now, Heather's Picks, you all see it. It's in the window. You can read about it. It's Heather's books that she'd recommend. What I don't think most people understand is the efficacy of it. And you can say, well, I want you to talk about like why has Heather's Picks been so effective in your view?
Well, also, where did it come from?
How did it come up?
I've been picking books and recommending them since I was 11. So these are just books I read that I love like crazy. They come with a money-back guarantee. We don't get many back, but they come with a money-back guarantee.
It's like your money-back on
exactly.
How many people in this audience are Francophone, read French first? Okay, we were just here today talking about doing les livres en français, Heather's Picks en français. We were just here talking about it, and I'm going back to reading in French a bit as a brain training, so we're gonna have those.
These are your first set of customers, your beta customers.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you going to code again also?
Yeah.
You do coding again also?
I should, but yeah. I'm way rusty on coding.
But it's been so effective, and I think most people don't realize how important and impactful it is. I'm fascinated by this thing.
Yeah.
Well, that's very nice of you to say.
Did you have it on day one in Burlington?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. My first pick was a book called The Secrets of Grazie dei Rossi. We opened with it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, listen, it's if you do anything in life with authenticity, right? So these are books I read and I love, and when I read a book I love, I'm dying to tell people about it. So that's all I do. I just tell people about it.
Yeah. I want to be respectful of time. We don't have too much time left, but a couple things I want to cover. First is, you've now all heard the Indigo story. It's this incredible, iconic story, not just for Canada, but in the world, with an iconic leader. You're back now, as I said. You're taking the company private.
I did.
You took the company private, privatization, no longer publicly traded. We're also neighbors in Toronto. We're in the same building, which I feel very proud of. What's the plan?
The plan is to not just, first of all, I had to bring the company back to who we were. We got a little bit lost for 2 years and bring it back. And it's having a huge impact. I'm really happy about that. But I'm interested in where we go now as a company that is about reading and ideas in a world where attention spans have declined. How many people in this room have children? How many people are concerned about the amount of time your kids spend with their phones? Right.
Yeah,
and I'm curious, how many people here, I'm just curious, how many people here feel you, and be honest, you wish you scrolled less and read more? Right. That's what I'm interested in. Wow. I'm interested in the connection. There is a giant neurological connection. I wish your wife was out here, right in the audience. Between long-form reading and brain development. And reading real books and your ability to sleep in good quality sleep, right? There's a huge connection. And I am deeply interested in the connecting people to what they really want to read and what they really want to do, and enhance. On the kids business, our goal is to have Canadian children the most literate in the world, both the ones we serve and the ones we do through our foundation.
How do you do that?
You have to bring me back. That's a whole discussion. That is a whole discussion. Yeah. And to increasing, like our mission is to inspire reading and enrich the lives of our book lover customers. And there's a lot I want to do in that.
But wait,
so that's
I
need your help.
Maybe it's a full plan on how you get kids reading more, but how do you take something so powerful like the scrolling effect?
Right.
It's addictive, we all know that.
It is addictive.
Right, so conceptually, just from 1,000 feet, how do you go about, because you're right, we all want to sit there and read a book. We romanticize it, and yet we don't do it. Yet we stay on our phones and we
right.
we scroll.
It's a lot if you actually can hook into something you feel like reading and you get into it in the first 4 pages, it's unbelievable what happens. You've got to give yourself that chance, right? So what we found is heavy readers still exist. Everyone thinks book buying has gone away. It hasn't. It's declined almost not at all. It's format mix. Yeah. By the way, e-readers have gone way down. Audio has its place because people can listen to story while they're doing things. So we're going to do audio for sure. But there's a lot of ways. If I put the right book in your hands, man,
it's curation. You're going to read.
It's curation, and it's the application of AI to curation, which I'm really interested in. I'm really interested in. I say that again.
I think you're interested.
So there's a lot. There's a lot that I think there is to excavate on this subject, and I'm...
Cool. I mean, frankly, for David and I, there's no better run companies than founder-led companies.
Yeah.
We think founder-led... I know there's a lot of... Show of hands, how many of you are founders in the room? Yeah, I mean, founder-led companies, there's nothing like it. There's no one's going to care more, work harder, be more focused, be more ambitious than founders. And to bring a founder back into the helm like you, I'm so excited.
And then when you transfer... What I missed, I just took for granted, were the values and soul of the place. Yeah. And I just assumed it was so central, like breathing.
Right.
And I think this is true even when entrepreneurs are building organizations, and I bet you both have views on this. Values alignment is number one. The minute I came back, first of all, 2 people who quit came back that I adore. Yeah. And
there's a magnetism to it, right?
It is all about those core values and making those core values happen.
And we have to go, but before I do, there is something. I mean, I have my mother and my wife sitting in the audience. I also have 2 daughters. And so one thing that I've always been inspired by you since the day you and I met in Muskoka many years ago was the way that you have been. You said earlier that the thing you wanted even before being an entrepreneur was to be a mom, to have kids.
Yes.
You seem to have this incredible way to, I don't want to call it balance because it's more like it's harmony, this work-life harmony. You have 11 grandchildren, I believe, right? You're a titan of industry.
Go for it.
We don't even have time, but we're not going for any more kids. Actually, this is where I want to tell you all. We're just kidding. But you're a titan of industry, not just in Canada, around the world, but you're an incredible grandmother, leader. We haven't even had a chance to talk about your philanthropy. I mean, you have $100 million to make sure that we have more AI technology innovated.
No, and
you built the emergency wing at Sinai Hospital.
I mean, you've done these
amazing... It's the relationship between technology and humanity. But anyway, go ahead.
But how do you do it all? How does this all work out? What do I tell my daughters to be more like you? And what do we all tell everyone to sort of balance
this? This is going to sound like the least feminist answer, and I am a proud feminist. I married well, and I was born well. That is, my parents gave me good values. 3 things. My parents gave me good values. I'm blessed with good health. So I hope that, right? And they gave me that. And I have the most incredible husband. I think, I tell him all the time, 80% of what I've succeeded at, I put at his feet, support-wise, the balance, the way, I can't even express my gratitude for him and the way in which that has enabled me to follow my passions.
Amazing.
I'm just a curious person.
Heather, Harley loves to say we stand on the shoulders of giants, and I think that it goes without saying that you are clearly one of those giants. We're both tremendously inspired by you, and I know everyone in this audience has gotten a lot out of this talk, so thanks.
I want to make sure I don't leave with one thing. The number of mistakes I've made is a legend and could fill a book. I don't want to leave. I never like to leave these discussions with someone thinking it was just all these big wins. It's 1,000 little mistakes and a few big ones. We just keep at it.
Thank you so much. We build big shops for people like you. Thank you.
Started from the bottom, now the whole team here.